Okay, today's class is dedicated by Liz and Dr. Michael Michel, and Liz Michel is here with us, gracing us, so thank you very much. In loving memory and in honor and Leilu Nishmas of her father, Rav Yisrael Yitzchak Halevi ben Harav Binyamin, who passed away 25 years ago on the 11th day of Teves. You're smiling because you remember. Yes. Rabbi Irving Levy was a respected Talmid Chacham, a legendary Bal Chesed, and one of the founding fathers of the beautiful Monsey community. So everything, all the fruits we harvest today and reap today is from the pioneering work of the individuals who trailblazed this path. So today's class is dedicated in honor of his yahrzeit, Tehei Nishmas Tzrura, B'tzrer HaChaim, and may he remain an eternal source of love and blessing and light and inspiration to you and to the whole family and all of the grandchildren and great-grandchildren. I should mention 6 great-grandchildren serving in the army, protecting our people and our homeland. And may his memory always serve as a powerful source of empowerment and inspiration to the family and to all of the Jewish people. And thank you very, very much. Also, today's class is dedicated l'schus, in the merit of Leora Ruth Bas Sarah, and in merit of all Jewish women, yes, and all of our soldiers in Eretz Yisrael. May God protect them all. Amen, and thank you very, very much. You could sit up front. There's a few seats here, with pleasure. You could sit either right here or here, maybe, whatever is more comfortable. You know, there's moments in life where we sometimes face challenges or adversity that seem to be so potent and overwhelming and completely impossible to deal with, like an insurmountable obstacle. Sometimes the heart intuitively feels what's the right thing to do, but the mind, often trying to be rational, says just there's no way you're going to be successful. This is a place where we're just stuck and you have to acquiesce to failure. There is a deep emotion or maybe a deep feeling what to do, what not to do. But again, there's another voice that says this is too big for you, you're incapable, it's impossible. And today we're going to learn a very powerful story in this week's portion, which really guides us and gives us a blueprint when it comes to such situations. Now we're going to go through a story that some of you probably heard, 100 times, at least a few dozen times, certainly many times. Any self-respecting Jewish school, the kids grow up with this story. There's coloring books. Every coloring book, a Friday, has this story, a lot of pictures around it. And one particular aspect of this story is so well known that it's really deeply ingrained in our curriculum and our education. And for good reason, because it is one of the most foundational stories in Jewish history. And of course, it's the story of Moshe Rabbeinu's birth and rescue as an infant. Often, as a child, when you learn stories and then you hear the Medrashic interpretations, you know, it's just part of our culture and part of our bloodstream, as they say. When you get older, sometimes it just behoves us to be able to revisit it and to see if there was maybe a depth or a profundity that we can often miss. And the truth is, children are capable of very, very profound ideas. Often I find more than adults, because their minds are very fertile and extremely open. They understand much more abstract realities than we think they do. But sometimes, you know, things are dumbed down and they don't always get the full point, and it really depends on the communicator, the teacher, the parent, the educator, the mentor, because always, you know, we can only educate someone else as much as we educate ourselves. You can only change somebody else to the point that you're ready to change yourself. That's an old and deep and true rule in life. I can't change anybody more than I'm ready to change myself. So Let's go through the story. It's the well-known story. Pharaoh made a decree that every male Jewish infant that is born should be cast into the Nile Delta. Yeah. So it's interesting. It says in the verse doesn't say Jewish boys. It says Vayitzav Pharaoh lechol amay. He commanded his entire nation. Kol habein hayilad haya'ara tashlichu. Any v'chol habas techayon. Any boy that's born should be cast into the river. He doesn't say Jews. It's interesting. If you look in the Onkelos in the Aramaic translation over there, he adds any boy that's born the Isyalad li Yehudai, that is born to the Jewish faith. I once heard from the former chief rabbi of Israel, Rabbi Yisrael Meir Lauschlit, and he said something, tragic but profound. He said, Parai made it as a decree because simply a population explosion. It had nothing to do with the Jews. There was no anti-Semitism involved. But the Targum, which is the translations, they said they whispered, it's the Jews, it's the Jewish kids, it's not all the kids. So in the verse, it's like, no, we just need to control the population. There's just too many people, there's not enough food, there's not enough shelter. It's just a decree about everybody. There's no blatant anti-Semitism here. But the Targum says, the whisper was, it's the Jewish kids. This is based on the Ramban, who holds that Pharaoh's entire mechanism was completely secretive and clandestine. There was, to the point that if the Jews came to Pharaoh to complain, he's like, oh really? I never knew these evil things are happening. It was a whole brilliant mechanism that he created, similar to how the Germans did it in the beginning, so that there shouldn't be an outcry and a revolt. It's a very interesting discussion in the Ramban. Nechama Leibowitz and her brilliant commentary on Chumash dedicates a whole essay to this. Rashi also says that for one day it was for everybody. That one day. Afterwards it was only for the Jews. So it's very interesting that the Torah only speaks about everybody. In any case, Moshe Rabbeinu was born. And we know little Moshe is born. At that point his name is not Moshe. In fact, the Medrash says that his parents named him a different name. It's actually 10 different names that he had, but his parents named him Teves, or Yekusiel, or Tuvia. The Medrash in Vayikra goes through 10 different names that Moshe had before he was given the name Moshe, which was not really a Jewish name. Okay, we'll get to that in a moment. So Moshe is born, baby Moshe is born before he has this name. His mother says the moment he's born, she sees how precious, how good he is. She can hide him for 3 months, but after 3 months, she's simply not capable of hiding this infant anymore. And that means at any moment, he will be kidnapped by the Egyptian tyrants, by the Egyptian monsters, and cast and drowned in the Nile. So we know what she does. She constructs a little basket, and she takes her baby who's only 3 months old, she puts him in the basket, and she places it in the marsh at the bank of the Nile River. What was she thinking? We don't know what she was thinking, it doesn't say. But I guess she thought maybe somebody will have compassion. Maybe an Egyptian will find this boy and save him. She doesn't know. But if he stays in the house, he'll for sure be killed. So she's hoping. And of course his sister, stands from far simply to watch what happens. And now an unexpected turn in the story. And let's see it inside. This is the book of Shemos, chapter 2, verse 5. Sefer Shemos, Parshas Shemos, Perek Bais, Pasuk Hey. You have it in the Hebrew on the right side, the original, and in the English, which I took from Safari, on the left side. Vatered bat Parai lirchetz al hayar. The daughter of Parai goes down to bathe in the Nile. Vanarisa halchas al yad hayar. And her maids are walking along the Nile. Vateres hateva b'toich hasuf. She sees the basket in the midst of the marsh. Vatishlachas amasa. She sends her amasa. Literally, most people would say amasa is her maidservant, one of her servants. As we'll see, our sages had a different perspective. Vatikachaha. And she takes the basket. She retrieves this little basket from the Nile River. She went into the river. She went to bathe, and she saw it, and she retrieves it. Vatiftach. She opens it. Vatireyu es hayeled. And she saw him. She saw him, and this was a child. V'hinei nar boicha. And behold, he was a weeping lad. Vatachmal alav. She has compassion for him. Vatoimer, and she says, Miyaldiha ivrim zeh. Obviously, this is one of the Jewish children. How did she know? Well, one logical way is, some of the commentators say, who would put their child in a basket in a river? This would be the scheme of a Jewish mother who, desperate and with some hope, some hope in a crazy situation, might put her child here. And then we know the story, the sister, of course, who was Miriam, runs over to her and says, should I go and call for you a wet nurse from the Hebrew women so that the child can be nursed? The baby was crying. And she says, yes, go. And of course, in a brilliant move of Miriam, she goes and gets her mother. So in verse 9, Vatayimah the daughter of Pharaoh, says, take this child and nurse him for me, and I will give you your wages. So basically, Moshe gets to be nursed by his mother, and his mother gets paid for that. That's pretty good. I don't know how many of you were paid for feeding your children. They think you should pay them, right? That was a joke. So the woman took the child and nursed him. Did the daughter of Paroi know what is happening? Maybe. She seems like an intelligent girl. So she probably had what they used to call in German Yiddish, a Spitzenfingergefühl. Anybody knows what a Spitzenfingergefühl is? Sixth sense. She may have sensed it. But obviously everything was a secret. So Moshe is saved. There's a Jewish woman nursing him. She's even being paid by the princess of Egypt, the daughter of Pharaoh. Vayigdal hayeled, the boy grows up. Vativayehu lebes Pharaoh, and she, the wet nurse, his real mother, brings him to the daughter of Pharaoh. Vahila levain, and he becomes a son to her. She adopts him like her own child. Vatikra shmai Moshe, she also names him Moshe. Vataymer, she says, Kiminamayim mishisiyu, I drew him from the water. Moshe means I drew him from the water. That's the story. Right after this story, we have verse 11. The story now takes a whole other turn. This is Moshe as an infant, as a baby, literally being rescued from death. Now the next story is Vahi bayamim haheim. It came to pass in those days, Vayigdal Moshe. Now Moshe is already a grown up. He grew up in the palace. He grew up by the daughter of Pharaoh. Vayetze alechav, he goes out to his brothers. Obviously somebody told him his true story. Vayar b'sivloisam, he sees their suffering. Vayarish mitzri maki shivri meyechav. He sees an Egyptian man striking a Hebrew man, one of his own brothers. Moshe considers them his brothers, even though he's an Egyptian prince, so to speak. And we all know the story of Vayifin kai v'kai. He turns this way, that way. Vayarkei enish, he sees there's no man. Vayachas hamitzri, he strikes the Egyptian dead. Vayitmeneu b'chayil, and he hides him in the sand. As he comes out and he sees this Egyptian beating a Jew to death, so he now takes the initiative and he kills the Egyptian. What happens afterwards in the story is somebody informs to the Pharaoh, who's Moshe's grandfather, right? It's a Zayda, so to speak, adopted grandfather, because it's the daughter of Pharaoh's father. And he hears what his grandson or adopted grandson did, and he wants to kill him. And that's when Moshe becomes a fugitive and he runs away to Midian, and there the story takes another twist, where he goes to the well, which was basically the central meeting place, and where he knew that some of his great patriarchs met some very interesting people. And that's where he meets Yisro's 7 daughters, and he saves them from the harassment of the shepherds, and of course one of them ends up becoming his wife and soulmate, Tzipporah. Now, when we look at this story of the daughter of Paroi, and it's interesting that the Torah does not give her a name. The Torah just says, Vatered Bas Paroi, the daughter of Paroi went down to bathe at the river. In Divrei Hayamim, in the book of Chronicles 1, chapter 4, we do have a name for her. Her name is Bisya Bas Paroi. Bitya, or people call her Batya, but the way it's pronounced is Bisya, Beis, Saf Yud Hey. Bisya Bas Paroi, Batya Bas Paroi. Over there she is given a name. According to the sages, it's the same person. But here her name is not said, even though here is the story. Over there just mentions her husband's name. His name was Mored. But there's a reason for it, because the real story is not her personal name, Batya, or any other name. The story is that she was the daughter of Paroi. That the daughter of Paroi is the one who goes down to bathe the river. Now when she's there and she sees the basket, she decides to retrieve the basket, opens it up, and has compassion. It's an amazing story. It's a beautiful story. Yocheved, Moshe's mother's hope in the darkest of situations, that something may save this child, indeed comes to fruition. Miriam, of course, is the great Shadchan who brings it all together. And we're very grateful Moshe survived. When we take a look, though, in the Gemara, in Medrash, and Rashi, there's a whole other story. And it's this other story that we want to focus on. And I'm going to raise some questions today that probably, some of you, when you were children, the first time you heard this, you asked this question. But you may have been told, we don't ask these questions. Or when you're older, you'll understand, which you never did. But now you're older, so hopefully today we'll try to understand together. Very often, children ask very, very intelligent questions. We don't always have the answers. So sometimes, if we're really unevolved, we get triggered and we get upset. We teach them not to ask questions. And in that sense, we dumb down not only our intelligence, but their intelligence. And we also teach them something deeper. And that is, real authentic questions will not be addressed in this place because nobody can deal with it. That's a horrible pedagogical mistake, especially today when people are extremely, always, but today people are intelligent and children are very intelligent and they think a lot and they process a lot. And if there can't be an authentic conversation, it means essentially that faith means I have to close my eyes, because if I open my eyes, who knows what's going to happen. So pedagogically, spiritually, it's quite an error. So here we have a fascinating teaching of our sages. And if we want to be a little irreverent, it's strange. Why would they need to add this supernatural story that we'll observe in a moment on a very, very beautiful story? What's their supernatural story? You remember? And it's many of the coloring books. What is it? You remember? Her hand got longer. Now, we just read the text. The text didn't say that. If it says in the text, it says in the text. It says the sea split. It doesn't say her hand got longer. It says she went to bathe, and she saw a basket, and she sent a masa. We'll soon see what that means. And she took it, and she opened it up. Right? The story has a sequence that makes a lot of sense. So let's see Rashi. Rashi says, Es amasa. Who is this amasa? Es shivchasa. It means her maid. Rabbi Seinu darshu lashon yad. Our rabbis gave it a different interpretation. Vatishleches amasa doesn't mean she sent her servant. It means she sent her hand. Like it says by Avram Avinu, Vayishlach Avram es yadai. It means her hand. Why is it called amasa? The answer is, there's a measurement in Hebrew called an amma. What is an amma? An amma is basically the joint from the elbow to the tip of the middle finger, which means from the elbow to the tip of the middle finger is known as amma in Hebrew. And that's why the measurement called amma is based on that. So that's basically that joint from the elbow all the way down to the bottom of the tip of the finger is called amma. So they say that's vatishlach es amasa. Vatishlach es amasa is another way of saying she sent forth her arm, or she sent forth her hand. But then the question is, why doesn't it say vatishlach es yada? We usually don't use the word amasa for hand. Now, it makes more sense to say amasa means her maid. There is an expression in Hebrew called amma, right? We have amma ha'ivriya, if you remember Parshas Mishpatim. An amma means a maid. The more common term is shifcha. So it could have said vatishlach es shifchasa. So it's an uncommon term, vatishlach es amasa. And because of that, they said it doesn't mean maid, it means hand. But why are you calling it amasa? And this is where they come up with this fascinating story. Because if it would say she stretched out her hand and took it, it would just mean her hand took the basket. Vatishlach es amasa means that something happened to the amma of the hand. Instead of becoming an amma, it became much longer than that. So that's what Rashi is going to say here. The last few lines. Vehem darshu es amasa es yada. It's her hand. V'nishtarveva amasa amas harbe. Her arm grew many cubits so that she can reach the basket. That's why it doesn't say yada. It says amasa because something happened. It was her amma. Her amma wasn't a regular amma. This was a unique amma. An amma usually is between a foot and 2 feet. A foot and a half. Some people say it's a little more than a foot and a half. Okay, that's a big argument in halacha, exactly what an amma is. We like arguing about everything, so we argue what an amma is exactly. Fine. But you're talking about 1.5 feet, 2 feet, that zip code. Somewhere there, right? You wouldn't have gotten that point. Her amma suddenly became many ammas. Imagine her hand wasn't a foot, or her arm wasn't a foot and a half. Imagine it was 20 feet, 50 feet, 100 feet. Because the basket somehow was floating deep in the river. How could she reach it? Rashi says, amasa nishtarvava. Nishtarvava means her hand stretched out many, many ammas. If you turn to the second side, Rashi didn't make this up on his own. Rashi got this from the Gemara. Saita daf yud Bais, amud Bais, that's tractate Saita. The Gemara says, Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Nechemia. There's a big debate between two of the greatest sages, Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Nechemia. Chad amar yada, chad amar shivchasa. What does amasa mean? One says it means her hand. The other one says, no, she didn't send her hand, she sent her maid. And the Gemara says, why do they argue? Do we have to argue about everything? It's a nice story. She got the basket. No, let's argue about this. And why is it even relevant? And what's the difference? The bottom line, it's interesting. Like the bottom line is the kid was saved. Thank God. Next. No. How did the basket come? Like what a classic, quintessential Jewish argument. 3,500 years passed, and we're still discussing, well, let's figure this out. How did it come? You sent me? No, you didn't send me. I never went. Oh, it was your hand. Oh, it was your hand. So why'd it say Amasa? Very, very fascinating what Jews argue about. But as we shall see, what seems like a very technical, and I would say maybe inconsequential, and really valueless argument, like thank God the basket is here, like who cares, is really representing something very, very profound. And it's a lesson for all of these type of debates and discussions. So one says it's her hand, one says it's her mate. Manda amar yada d'ksiv amasa. It doesn't say shivchasa, it says amasa. It should have said shivchasa. Shivchasa is the common term for mate. Manda amar shivchasa, medolai ksiv yada. The other one says it's a mate, because if it would be the hand, it should say yada, not amasa. Ulamanda amar yada lichtav yada, so it should have said yada. Hakamash malon de ishtarvev ishtarvuvi. Ishtarvev ishtarvuvi is an Aramaic term which means her arm stretched more and more and more and more, and that's why it doesn't say yada. It says amasa to give you a different type of term, that there was something strange here with the amma. It was not the regular measurement from the shoulder or from the elbow till the tip of the finger. Now I don't want to be a party pooper. I don't like being a party pooper at all. And as somebody who tells quite a lot of stories, I do not want to ruin a good story. It's the last thing I would want to do. But I'm compelled to be a little bit of a party pooper. And I want to put myself for a moment, with a lot of humility, or put us all for a moment, into the minds of these sages. Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Nechemia, the same idea is quoted in the Medrash Rabbi Shemos. Rashi quotes it, so Rashi feels it's very relevant even in the literal interpretation of Chumash. I want to put myself in their shoes and come back to the story and see what compelled this interpretation. Again, if the text says it explicitly, it says it explicitly. But the text obviously doesn't say it explicitly. They had a problem with the word amasa. So because it doesn't say yada, therefore we're going to create a miracle and say that her hand stretched out, let's say 20 feet, 30 feet, 40 feet. What compelled our sages to impose this miraculous supernatural story into this very natural story, which even in its most natural version is a very, very inspiring story? Like, what's wrong with the story as it's read? Here is a heroine, a great woman, the daughter of Pharaoh, the tyrant of Egypt, who sacrifices her own life to save a little Jewish infant, and she knows he's Jewish. She says it. The Torah uses those two words, vatachmai lalav. She has compassion in an insane environment where compassion is deleted, where compassion is obsolete, where compassion has been replaced by cruelty, by sadism, by barbarity. Suddenly there's a girl or a young woman from which compassion would be completely unexpected. She's the daughter of Pharaoh. She got her education in Pharaoh's palace. She was raised by this tyrant, by this dictator. Isn't that an incredible, incredible story? Why the need to tell me that her hand stretched out 50 feet or 20 feet or 10 feet or 100 feet or 200 feet? So you'll say, well, we have a problem with amasa. Okay, so because you have a problem with a word, therefore we're going to go to such an extreme and create such a dramatic miracle? Number one. Number two, I would argue, and again, forgive me for my irreverence, I would argue that the miraculous story actually eclipses and takes away the natural story. I would say that in this case, the natural story is far more inspiring and interesting than the miraculous story. Because the miraculous story is like, okay, you can't reach the basket and suddenly your arm extends, so it's like God doing all these miracles. Fine. The natural story is in a way so much more powerful. It's about the human courage, moral courage in the face of such darkness and insanity. It's such a powerful story. It's such a potent story. You know, sometimes you need a miracle touch in order to give the story some luster, some meat and potato, some, some oomph, some energy. Here, you can't get better than this. Was willst du? The miracle just... It's Mesiach Das. It takes away our attention from the actual, the concrete, simple, physical, natural story that happened here. I have a third question. We all know there's a famous principle, a famous sefer called Drashas Haran, and he elaborates this in his 8th drasha, but this is a very well-known dictum. God does not do miracles in vain. Nature is not a mistake. Nature is the rhythm of life, and the consistency of nature is the glory of existence. So miracles are not just done, why not? Let's throw out a miracle. Every miracle has a profound, profound purpose that needed this miracle. The question here is, what about here? Why was there a need for a miracle here? That her arm should stretch out. I mean, for heaven's sake, she went down to bathe, so she was in the water. So go swimming. It's good exercise anyway. And the Nile, she must have been in a very beautiful section of the Nile. The Nile is the second to the longest river, I think, in the world. I think 4.5 or 5,000 miles. Right? It goes from Warsaw to Kennedy Airport. It would go. I mean, it doesn't go from Warsaw to Kennedy Airport, but that's it goes. Yeah, people don't know. It goes through 11 countries. Yeah, the Nile is the longest or the second to the longest river in the world, I think, after the Amazon, or maybe even longer, or the same size. They argue which is the longest. It's an incredible, incredible river. And parts of it are not so geschmack, parts of it are beautiful and stunning. My assumption is that the daughter of Pharaoh had a private beach, and she had a very, very nice section. Go swimming, go get the basket. You went down to bathe, so what's the big deal? I mean, it couldn't have been miles and miles and miles if you have to swim 20 miles. I mean, she saw it. You don't want to do it yourself? Send a maid. They're arguing why it says Amasa, Shivchasa, Yada. So Hashem makes her hand stretch out like this. But why you don't need a miracle here. It's like if I need a tissue. So my hand does not have to stretch out to your table to get a tissue. I have tissues there. Miracle. I can ask somebody, can you please give me a tissue? Batya is a princess. They're happy to do what she said. In fact, one opinion says that. She sent her maid. That's why she had assistants. That's why she had helpers. Go get me the basket. You don't want to send them? Go yourself, swim. You'll have a beautiful morning swimming. So we say, why not? The hand stretched out. What would be the point of that? There's no need for a miracle. When there's no need for a miracle, actually, it's inconsistent with the whole idea. In Judaism, a miracle is always when there's an absolute necessity. Not stam, let's do another miracle. Finally, I want to ask what they called in Yiddish, your grandmother would call a klotzkasha. You know what a klotzkasha is? I don't know how to translate a klotzkasha. I'm sorry. Huh? A silly question. Yeah, but it's usually very good questions. Yeah. Usually klotzkashas are good questions, okay? I want to know, now be honest with me, if you went to a river, a beautiful, beautiful beach, and you saw a basket, and you're curious, maybe your instinct tells you that there's something very precious there, and you decide to go in and stretch out your hand and bring it. And as you stretch out your hand, suddenly your hand starts going like this. 1 foot, 2 feet, 3 feet, 5 feet, 10 feet, 50 feet, 80 feet, 90. What would you do? Scream. And how long would you stick around that place? You would run for your life. And on the way, you would take out your phone. Oh, you don't have your phone because you're in the river. Okay. You would ask somebody to call 911. Shoimrim, Misaske, Mizamrim, Mishayim, whatever it is, Mishtara, Hatzala, I don't know, call, Hatzala, get me out of this crazy place. There's ghosts here, there's demons here. I would be very, very scared. I give this girl credit. Her hand suddenly stretches. I mean, let's face it, this is from like horror movies. I mean, you'll forgive me for this expression. It's like could be a scene of a horror movie. You know, when things start stretching, what's coming next? My leg is going to start stretching, and then my stomach is going to start stretching. It's already outstretched enough. I'm not talking about Bati, I'm talking about me. Like, what's next? What else is going to stretch? You know, there's good stretching in yoga. It's good, it's healthy. You get the adrenaline pumping, the circulation pumping. But there's a shear, right? When your hand starts stretching, it's pretty scary. Very good. It's a pretty scary story. As we grow up with this story, we usually don't give these things thought, or we do, but we don't maybe get very intelligent answers. So let's summarize our questions. Number one, the text doesn't say there was a miracle. What compelled our sages, Chazal, to put this into the text? Now, I know they had a difficulty with the word amasa, but still it seems far-fetched. Number two, the natural story seems far more miraculous than the miracle story. The natural story is heroic, it's amazing, it's inspiring, it's awe-inspiring. You're just ruining it. Number three, God doesn't do miracles in vain. Why was there a necessity for this miracle? The basket could have been retrieved under natural circumstances, either by swimming there or sending somebody there. And finally, it seems like a very scary event that most people would probably run for their lives because, like, I'm not dealing with this situation. In order to answer these questions, we need to understand how Medrash works. And I want to give gratitude to a dear colleague from the Five Towns, Rabbi David Foreman from Aleph Beta, who also has many works on Chumash, who gave a class a number of years ago on this, with these questions and some other ideas. And a lot of the thoughts I'm going to share come from him. And it's also based, as we're soon going to see, on one of the great Hasidic masters, Reb Simcha Binim of Pshischa, who says the insight as well, the core of it. What is Medrash? When people grow up learning Chumash or Tanakh, Medrash is often quoted. The Medrash says this. You read to your kids at night. The Medrash says on Shabbos, the Medrash. And the Medrash always has apparently more stories than what the text has. And many people think, and they think this honestly, that it's simply like the sages wanted to make the stories more entertaining. So like Batya comes to the river, okay, let's stretch her hand, why not? First of all, it's good for coloring books. It gives you a couple of hands. You could make them green and white and yellow and blue. Why not? So that's number one. Number two, it adds drama to the story. And you see it constantly in the Medrash. They add this story and that story. You know, Yaakov meets Esav, right? It says he kissed him. What does the Medrash say? He tried to bite him, and what happened to his neck? His neck, you remember, became marble. Like, weird does that say? It's a Geshmaka story. Why not? Let's send Esav to a dentist for a couple of decades. Why not? Break his teeth. It's good for him to break his teeth. But again, what's wrong with Esav just meeting Yaakov? And it's a beautiful story. He kissed his brother. Deep down, they had positive emotions towards each other. They were brothers after everything's said and done. So people often misunderstand. We have a story this week that Moshe went on a donkey back to Egypt. So which donkey is it? You remember which donkey? It's the same donkey that Avram used for the Akedah, and it's the same donkey that Mashiach is going to come on. Wow, this donkey has Arichas Yamim. I want to have his genes. This donkey has some good genes. That donkey's 4,000 years old, and where is he? And again, like, what's wrong? Moshe went on a donkey. It says he went on the donkey. Okay, which question? Who's the donkey? So from the donkey became Avram's donkey, Mashiach's donkey. Right? These are very important questions. Like, to put ourselves on what are the sages teaching us? When one doesn't have context for this, it could seem like, and I say it could seem like completely unjustified, almost like it's not serious. Just put in another story. Let's just make it more entertaining. The truth is, it's the exact opposite. And to understand this, and I'll give Rabbi Foreman's metaphors, music will be a good understanding. When you sit down at the piano, you remember the first time you or your child decided to sing a song when they thought they were pianists. And they started like this. Da 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 dum. Da, and you're like, okay, Carnegie Hall tomorrow. Or da 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 da. Don't worry, I'm not going to quit speaking. There was a guy who came to a rabbi and he said he needs a job. He doesn't have parnasa. So the rabbi says, do you have any offers? He said, yeah, I can become a singer and I can become a dancer. What do you suggest? So the rabbi said, I think you should become a dancer. He says, really? Wow, that's so interesting. Why, you've seen me dance? He said, no, but I heard you sing. So the notes are actually accurate. Da 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 da. But something is off. What's off? It's accurate. What's missing is the resonance and the harmony. And usually with the piano we have the right hand and the left hand. The pianists here probably can explain this very well. And with one hand we stick to the actual notes of the ballad, and the other hand gives us the harmony and it fills the gaps. So somebody else sits down at the piano, it's a whole different experience. What happened? I did it right the first time, but it was more stuck, it was more stagnant. It didn't have the flow, the musical resonance.
It was embellished.
Yes, it was embellished, very good. But embellished doesn't mean like somebody exaggerating and saying things that are not true. Embellished in the real sense of the term, it's an embellished story, which means 90% of it never happened. When you say harmony embellishes a song, it doesn't mean it creates a fictional reality. It brings out the full luster and depth and harmony in the ballad. So it's not just dry, it's not just the mere facts. The actual notes are like the mere facts. But the harmony gives it its beauty, its elegance, its exquisiteness, its bliss, its delight. It's pasha geschmack. You want to hear more? Play another song on the piano. The first person you're not asking to play another song. It's like, okay, Baruch Shepatrani, give me some Tylenol. The text of Torah Shebiksav is like the right hand on the piano. Medrash is the left hand. If you have only Medrash without the text, it's like a harmony without the song itself. And if you do just that, you'll see there's something missing, because you don't have the etzem, you don't have the core of the ballad. Once you have the right hand playing the actual notes, then the left hand brings out, it accentuates the full richness that is embedded in the melody. And that's what all of Medrash is. I don't know if there's even one exception to that. Yeah.
Does Medrash actually come from the oral Torah?
Yeah. The Medrash is essentially part of Torah Shabbal Peh. It's the oral tradition that was not written down with the text. So the text is almost like the essence. It's the core of the melody. The Medrash is here and saying, did you notice what this melody has? Do you hear the richness? Let me play the harmony for you. I want you to get the full song. I'm not here to create new stories and dramatize things and create fiction. Chas v'shalom. You're talking about Torah's emes. The prerequisite of all Torah is an unwavering commitment to authenticity and truth. The moment that commitment to authenticity and truth is missing, it's time to smash the idols, which is what Avraham Avinu did.
So it ends up not being a made-up story because it came from something.
Right. Now, there's different types of Medrash, meaning sometimes Medrash has to be understood literally, sometimes as metaphor. But the metaphor is also there in order to bring out the concept in an educational, engaging, relatable way, which is what metaphors do. Metaphors illustrate stories in a way that's illustrative so that people can relate to it. And we're going to take this Medrash and show you what they're doing here. The sages weren't interested here in embellishing a story that never happened and just having her hand stretch out 50 feet and 100 feet, which would have caused her to have a nervous breakdown. And even I would get queasy every year when I read it, and it's a strange story, and leave me alone. I don't need my hand stretching. I mean, I like to stretch my hand, but to a limited degree. I don't need it to become 50 feet or 100 feet. And there's no need for a miracle in vain. And the story itself is amazing. What the sages are doing here with this story is they're actually telling you the story. They're actually playing the song correctly. Because what they're saying is you could read through the story and not read the story. You get the facts, and it's nice. Moshe was saved, Batya raised him. I want you to really get the story. I really want you not only to understand the story, I want you to be able to internalize the story and apply it to your life. And how did they do that? They did it by this particular Medrash. And the same is true literally with every Medrash. It's revealing, it's exposing the inner music. So it fills the gaps. It always fills the gaps. Right? Another Medrash we once learned this together was that when Yaakov wakes up in the morning and he sees he married the wrong wife, Leah. Right? So the Medrash puts in a conversation that happened between Yaakov and Leah. You remember? Yaakov asked Leah, what do you... Very good. But the Medrash says he said something much sharper. He said something, I would expect Yaakov to go, what? Right? But the Medrash says Yaakov actually looked at her and said, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Your father is a liar, and you're a liar. And Leah responded. And what did she say? Every profession in life, in order to cultivate it, you need a teacher. You can't even become a barber if you don't have a mentor to teach you how to cut hair. Because if not, you're going to mess up people's hair. My father's a liar and I'm a liar, and we had a good teacher. And I'm going to tell you about our teacher. There was once an old man who couldn't see, and he wanted to bless his oldest son. And the younger son went and stole the blessings, lying to his father. He is the great mentor of me and my dad. He taught us how to lie. Whoa. Like, don't start up with Leah, okay? That's one lesson. You know, Yaakov thought he's going to, Leah came back. So, it doesn't say this in the text. Now, it's a fascinating conversation. Why would the sages put this in? Where did they get... They had a tape recorder in the room. Google had a video in the room, and they taped this conversation between Yaakov and Leah. Here again, when they read the text, they're bringing out the inner story. And we gave a whole shir about that. The same is true with literally every Medrash. It says when Yaakov met Rachel the first time, he started to weep. Doesn't say why. So there's this whole story because he saw that they won't be buried together. That's such an interesting Medrash. You remember that? Yaakov saw he won't be buried with Rachel. Here again, what? Maybe he wept because he was emotional. He remembered his mother. Rachel may have looked like his mother. It could be so many reasons he wept. He was a fugitive. He was alone in the world. There's a lot of reasons people could cry. Rachel was a unique human being, her persona, her face, etc. But they put in that something about the burial. He wept because he knew that he knew he won't be buried. Another reason he wept was because he was broke. Because Eliphaz, Esav's son, stole all of his money. Now, all these things don't say in the text, but they're in Medrash, and everybody learns them. Rashi quotes a lot of them. Only when you understand Medrash as the harmony, filling in the gaps, you understand that there's so much gaps and there's so many gaps in the text, because that's the text. The text is very brief and concise, divine and concise, and the Medrash fills it. So let's get to our story here. Far more than the physical story, this is a metaphoric story. The Maharal of Prague, the Maharsho often say with Midrashim, you have to know if it's a literal story or it's an illustrative, it's representing an idea. The arm represents that tool, that instrument that we use to reach things. I want to bring a sefer, I want to get a tissue, I want to get a cup of coffee. So I stretch out my hand and I take the book, I take the cup of coffee, I take the bottle of water, I take the mic, whatever it is. What the sages are telling you is this. When the daughter of Pharaoh came here to the river, she sees a basket. Now obviously, she was a princess, so not any basket that she sees is she busy retrieving. Obviously she had a feeling. Did she maybe hear something? Maybe she heard a muffled sound of an infant. Did she sense something? Sometimes your nervous system, your heartbeat, experiences something. She obviously sensed that there's something special in this basket. And she was right. There was quite a person there. As it says, when Moshe was born, the whole house was filled with light. That's another Medrash. The whole light was filled with light. So people who are sensitive can feel that light. And therefore she goes and she retrieves it. And then she opens it up, and of course, her suspicion or instinct is validated. There's a little baby there, 3 months old, sobbing away. Maybe he's terrified, he's starving, he's thirsty. That's why Miriam says, let me go get you a Jewish wet nurse, a Hebrew wet nurse to feed him. And she says, yeah. And she takes this baby as her own to the point that she's going to pay the wet nurse, meaning she's now the mother. She's going to pay a wet nurse, which is what a mother does. A mother pays the wet nurse. In other words, I am the full mother of this person. And ultimately, at the first opportunity, she takes him home and raises him as her own son to the point that she is the one who names him. So now the question is this. When Batya was standing at the bank of the Nile River and looking at this baby and planning to adopt him as her own child, was this a goal that you would say is within reach?
Not really.
Why not?
Because she's the daughter of Pharaoh.
Exactly. Exactly. Is this a goal that is reachable? Is this a goal that with your arm, with my arm, I can reach out for Rebbetzin Klein's bottle of water? I can do it. It's not so hard. If I want to stretch a little more, I'm not going to do all my yoga moves at the moment. I can get something a little further. Okay. If I really, really try, for those who are into stretching, bodies can be extremely flexible and amazing. But if somebody tells me, there's something, I left an object last time, Neil Armstrong left something on the moon. Can you please take your hand, you're a good stretcher, no? You're doing yoga for 39 years every morning from 5 in the morning till 6:30. So take your hand, stretch it, and get it off the moon. Now I'll say, Bistoit Meshiga. A spaceship, maybe, with a spaceship. There's certain goals that are simply not reachable. Your arm can go another foot, 2 feet, 3 feet. But there are goals that are unattainable unless you are completely living in the world of hallucination and fantasy. So now, if Batya was to articulate to me or to any of us her goal, there's a Jewish boy here. I feel bad for him. I think I'm bringing him home. I'm raising him as my son. What would any sane person tell this girl? You are insane, certified. That's what they tell you. You are Meshiga. The moment your father, Parai, sees this, he's going to kill not only the child, he's going to kill you. But I'm compassionate. I understand you're compassionate. So that's why you're going to die and the child is going to die. But what should I do? There's a baby here. Well, you know how many babies were killed? Wake up and smell the coffee. Okay? Your father ain't no saint. He's a villain. I can't do this. Okay. So what do we do now? So everybody should commit suicide now? You really feel bad? I have an idea for you. Find an Egyptian woman. Find some poor Egyptian woman living on the outskirts of some city in Egypt. Pay her. Let her raise him as her son. I don't know, maybe we can camouflage him to look a little more Egyptian. Okay, I can hear that. Nope, he's my boy. He's my boy. I'm going to name him Vayhila Leben. She adopts him officially like his son, like her son. This is a goal that is simply unreachable. I don't care what a strong and powerful and amazing arm and heart you have. There are dreams that are small. There are dreams that are big. There are ambitions that are titanic and great, but somehow attainable. There are people who have great dreams, but the dreams live in the realm of possibility. This seems like a dream that lives in the realm of impossibility. If I can give an illustration so that you see how clear this is. Imagine in 1942, if Adolf Hitler, Yamach Shemoy V'Zichroi, had a daughter, and this daughter was a very nice girl, and she sees in the Warsaw Ghetto, or in another ghetto, or in Treblinka, one of the transports, she sees a little Jewish baby, 3 months, and she knows the fate of this baby. And she feels compassion. So what does she do? She takes the child and raises him in the Berghof. She doesn't smuggle him to America. Doesn't smuggle him to Russia. Doesn't smuggle him to Britain or to Switzerland. She brings him to the Berghof. Are you crazy? You are absolutely insane. This is not a dream that's normal. This is a chalom shechalmu acherim al acherim al acherim. Quit while you are ahead. You are a crazy person. Everyone is going to die. With one bullet, he's going to kill both of you. You're done. If this is how he cares about people, how much do you think he cares about his daughter? Not only that, how do we know that this is true? First of all, it's quite logical. But the Gemara says this is exactly what her servants told her. The Gemara actually puts it into their mouth. Why does it put it into their mouth? Because this is the normal response of anybody. Batya, you're nuts, Bis Meshiga, you have a good life. You're the daughter of you're the wealthiest people in this land. This is a superpower. He is the most powerful person in the world. You're his daughter. You're privileged. Sich eingekauft Rachmanis in your heart. Be normal about it. Don't destroy your whole future. Literally a death sentence for you. If you'll take a look in the next source, if you turn it to side B of the source sheet, the second one. Vateres hateva b'toich hasuf, Saita daf yud Bais, tractate Saita, page 12. She sees the basket. Kivan de chazu de kabola atzula l'moisha. They saw that she wants to save this boy. Amrula, they said, Gviratenu, our master. Min hagoy shel oilam melech basav adam goyze gzeira im kol oilam kula ein mekayme noisa banovu bnei beisay mekayme noisa. In the whole world, when a king issues forth a decree, even if nobody listens to him, at least his children will listen to him. Va'at oiveres al gzeiras avicha. Where is your loyalty? He raised you. You grew up in the palace. You're supposed to be a good anti-Semite. Come on. You have in your genes this venom towards Jews, this carelessness for Jewish kids, this apathy towards Jewish infants. Even if the whole world doesn't agree with him, your family. Your family. Family doesn't do this to a father, especially such a father. You're a traitor. You're betraying, and they're not even talking about her mortal physical danger. They're saying this is disgusting how you're treating your father. Literally under his nose, betraying his command. What a chutzpah, what a spoiled, narcissistic girl. Her father gave her everything. He asked for one thing, to kill every Jewish boy, and you can't listen to him. Ashanda. They didn't use that word. It's this drama that our sages want us to understand. Now we have to say one thing. Thank God. Batya didn't listen to my dramatic accusation of her being insane, which they told her. You know what she did? She stretched out her arm. She stretched out her arm means much more than she stretched out her physical arm. Yes, of course she stretched out her physical arm. Maybe she sent her maid. Maybe she went swimming there. She stretched out her arm. What it means is, Batya said, I cannot remain passive. I cannot remain quiet. I cannot watch this. I can't. Sorry. You're right. I get it. My father, my father, my father. She stretches out her hand. But her hand is limited. How much can a human being achieve? Now here comes the story. And this is what the sages are telling us. When they say her hand stretches, it's saying something much deeper than just a physical miracle. Whether her hand stretched physically or not is not so relevant. What happened is this. In history, there is an invisible hand. It's the invisible hand of Hashem. Hashem is infinite. His arm is limitless. As she stretches out her arm, there's another arm that joins her arm, an invisible arm. And once that arm joins her arm, how long is her arm? Her arm is endless. Her arm is metaphysical. Her arm is limitless. Her arm is infinite. Because her arm is now an extension of a divine arm. And then things happen in ways that nobody could imagine. I think it was General Montgomery who said, the difficult we do immediately, the impossible takes a little longer. That's the story. The story is the courage of this young woman to stretch out her arm in the face of such adversity and darkness and craziness and insanity, where she could have easily been accused of being the most insane person, nuts, suicidal. And yet, she understands that in history there are moments you need to stretch out your arm. Show up with your heart, with your presence, with your creativity, with your authenticity. And there's an invisible arm. And once the invisible arm joins you, you would never be able to figure out and imagine the results. What happens? She takes him home. Pare likes him. What are you? This is a crazy story. She names him Moshe. It's exactly what happens. And then suddenly here you see how everything is connected in Torah. Now tell me if this is beautiful or not. 4 times in Chumash, throughout the whole Chumash, right away in Parshas Va'era and then even later in Dvarim, the exodus of Egypt is defined with one particular term. It is so emphatic because it's the opening of the Haggadah. That's how we know it's so important. It doesn't just say Hashem took us out of Egypt. It always has that expression, He took us out of Egypt. You remember? B'yad chazaka u'bizroya netuya. He took us out with a strong hand and with a stretched out arm. And I always wondered, well, God doesn't have an arm and He doesn't have a hand. It's all metaphoric. You could say God took us out with His heart, with His love, with His eyes, with, God saw us, He heard us. With a stretched, what does it mean He took us out with a stretched out arm? What, He chapped the Jews by their lapel and schlepped them out? It's obviously a metaphor. Why is that term repeated 4 times in Chumash? That's how we start off the story in the Haggadah. Avadim ayinu. I don't mean to bring back memories or preparations, but Pesach is coming and cleaning should begin this afternoon. Unless you're going to the hotel. Avadim ayinu lefare b'Mitzrayim, vayotzienu Hashem Elokeinu misham, biyad chazaka b'zend. At this point, everybody is still up at the Seder, no? The next paragraph, it gets a little sketchy. Because somebody decided that they have to share every Dvar Torah they ever heard in their entire life. Not only about Yetzias Mitzrayim, but about anything. But the first paragraph, there's still a pretty good mood, right? Before the ADHD kicks in and your daughter decides that she's ready for Shulchan Aruch, and your son already finished the Seder, and somebody else is having a meltdown. And we re-experience the exile of Egypt and try to liberate ourselves from it. By the way, people, just in parentheses, it's just popped in. Why are Seder so dysfunctional? The answer is because it's supposed to be Zecher Liyetzias Mitzrayim. You're supposed to relive what it looks like. So if you could get out of that, if you can get out of a Jewish Seder unscathed, in a good mood, that is a profound Yetzias Mitzrayim, by the way. So it's all a psychological exercise to test your sanity and equilibrium. Okay, if you don't relate to what I'm saying, it's fine. You're lucky. I remember somebody wrote me an email before one page and said, I wish I could come to your Seder table to see what an amazing, impeccable, flawless Seder looks like. And I tell my wife, I don't think he wants to come to my Seder table. My kids don't like when I say anything. You could speak to the world. At home, of course it makes sense. They're smart. Anyway, how did I know. B'yad chazaka b'zrei netuya. Fine. You could Hashem stretched out arm, you could say Hashem stretched out heart, Hashem stretched out consciousness, Hashem stretched out legs. I mean, it's all metaphoric. You see the depth? You know whose zroya netuya this is? He took us out of Egypt with a stretched out arm. Whose stretched out arm? Batya. It's her stretched out arm. That was the miracle of the exodus of Egypt. The greatest miracle here is not that her hand extended. The greatest miracle is that she stretched out her arm in the face of such profound darkness and abuse. When it would have been much more logical, cold logic would dictate, remain in your hole and be quiet. You care for Jewish kids? Go to your room and sigh. You could send a check for $36. If you're in a good mood, $360, no problem. For the HebrewSlaves.com. No problem. You don't do this, you're crazy. That's the miracle. B'zroya netuya, she stretched out her arm. But as she stretched out her arm, someone, the Creator, joined his arm with her arm. And that's how the Exodus happened. Because it was Moshe who grew up in the palace, who staged the revolt against his grandfather. And here we come to another fascinating thing. The Even Ezra asks a question. Why did Hashem have it that the first Jewish leader didn't grow up among Jews? You know, we have a law in America that the president, you can ask Trump about this, the president needs to be a homegrown potato, or at least a homegrown tomato. It's one of the unique elements in the relationship between Barack Obama and Donald Trump. And there's a logic to it. You want to lead a country, you have to be what's called, what do they call it? Mishaluni, from the eigene. What are they? Heimish, yeah? Heimish? If you were born in Jakarta, I have no problem. You were born in Peru, beautiful, enjoy Guatemala or Peru. But you have to understand the culture. Do you understand that Moshe Rabbeinu grew up? He never saw Shalom Zachar. He didn't know what chickpeas look like. He didn't know what jalapeno herring tastes like. How could you be Jewish? He didn't know what sponge cake, rugelach, cinnamon buns, babke, for heaven's sake, kokosh cake. You could lead the Jewish people without knowing what kokosh cake is? It's very hard. Yeah? He didn't see a Shalom Zachar, Vachnacht, Abris, Abba Mitzvah, Abbas Mitzvah. He grew up among the Egyptians. We don't have a Jewish leader like that. You have to feel the people. You have to know the culture where you're coming from. You have to understand the Mishigassen. A Jewish leader growing up without sushi at every simcha? And Chinese food? I mean, what type of Judaism is this without sushi and Chinese food? Maybe it's good for the Chinese and the Japanese, but not for the Jews. They could survive without it. How could we? The Even Ezra doesn't dramatize the question like me. I'm just giving a little harmony. Left hand harmony. It's a great question. So the Even Ezra answers always the best answer, and he says, I don't know, ask God. But then he says two other things. He says, number one, if Moshe would have grown up among Jews, they would not respect him. Ein Navi Be'ira. You can't be a prophet in your own city. When Moshe would become a prophet, there would be an old Jewish Yachna who's been living there forever, and she would look at him and say, oh, Moshe, I used to babysit for you. I remember when you ran around without a diaper. You were the hardest kid I ever had. When did you become a prophet? Good luck. But then Even Ezra says something else. If he would have grown up among Jews, he would have developed a slave mentality. And he could never stage a revolution against a superpower. Moshe Rabbeinu had to grow up in an ambiance of expansiveness. He had to grow up in royalty, so he had royal hasagas. If he would have grown up among the Jews, unfortunately, he would have had very, very narrow hasagas. He would have seen the world from a very narrow place. It's so true about people, because if I grow up in a box, sometimes I can't even think outside of that box, and if I do, it's only relative to that box. Somebody once told me that he asked his son, he said, his son told him, Tati, you tell me to think out of the box. I don't want to think out of the box. I want to think as though there's no box. If I grow up in a slave, in a home of slaves, by definition, even if I'm trying hard, my entire paradigm is so limited. And it happens to so many people's lives, emotionally and psychologically. Right? My greatest expectations are still defined by slavery. I grew up in Brooklyn, so there was a Yid over there. His name was Teddy. Teddy. Teddy used to go around every morning and collect, a whole day he would collect. He was a very nice old man. He would collect money for tzedakah, Teddy. And somebody once saw him buying a lottery ticket for $300 million on Kingston Avenue. He said, Teddy, if you win, what are you going to do with the money? He said, I'm going to put security guards at all the doors of shul so nobody else could collect money besides me. I could be the only one collecting money. I don't want anybody else collecting. I want all the money to go to me. He's going to have security guards by all the doors. He couldn't liberate himself from that paradigm, even if you have $300 million. So the Even Ezra says Moshe Rabbeinu had to grow up with royalty. So look what happens here. This Zroya Netuya of Batya not only has an impact, it creates a situation where he rebels against his own grandfather. He's the only one who could stand up to Pharaoh because he knows him, he feels him. He knows what aristocracy is, he knows what royalty is, he also knows what corruption is. People don't realize when Moshe approached Pharaoh, he was approaching his grandfather, his step-grandfather. He wasn't approaching some stranger. He knew this boy from childhood. It's his grandson, for heaven's sake. And that's what drove Pharaoh crazy. You, from all people? It's like, we saved you. We saved you. And that's the ultimate paradox of history, that it's the evil itself that assists to its own destruction, because its entire purpose is really to be destroyed and transformed. So that's why ultimately, deep down, that is what itself assists its own destruction. That's how it works. So Pharaoh, without knowing it, gave all this love, and he appointed Moshe as the leader of his home. And this Moshe himself staged this rebellion. So the great miracle of Yetzias Mitzrayim is biyad chazaka ubizroya netuya. And if you take it a step further, what happens right afterwards? She names him Moshe. Why does she name him Moshe? Because I took him out of the water. And that becomes his only name. Most people don't even know that Moshe had other names. The only name that we know till today is Moshe, Moses, Moshe Rabbeinu. The name that he was taken out of water. Why was that so important for his identity, that he was taken out of water? Because she wanted that Moshe should always know this. Because she knew that he was destined for leadership. And one of the greatest mistakes of people who have influence is they are afraid to stretch out their hands. And she's telling him, your name is Moshe because somebody stretched out their arm to take you out of water when there was no likelihood that it's going to work. So what's the first story about Moshe Rabbeinu? Look at the intricate beauty. What's the first story? He goes out from the palace. What's the first thing he sees? An Egyptian beating a Jew to death. He turns here and he turns there. Now again, I'm going to consult the audience here, okay? If you're Moshe Rabbeinu, you're standing there. You're in the Egyptian ghetto. An Egyptian is beating a Jew to death. Jews have no rights. They're in concentration camps. They're slaves. You're going to kill the Egyptian. What do you think, Moshe, is going to happen? You'll save the Jew maybe for a week. Maybe he'll be killed in a month. Maybe he'll be killed in 6 months. But one thing is sure, you killed an Egyptian. When Pharaoh hears about that, what do you think he's going to do to you? Moshe, I have a great idea for you, my dear friend Moshe. Play it smart. Don't say a thing. Walk away. Make believe you didn't see it. You know why? Get big in Pharaoh's palace. Pharaoh likes you. Rashi says he appointed him as the head of his estate. Grow more and more and more. You know what will happen one day? Pharaoh is going to kick the bucket one day. Everybody dies. He's anyway eating too much. He's overweight. Hopefully the heart attack and the stroke will come sooner than later. And he'll be mummified in one of those pyramids. They're going to need a new king, Moshe. Maybe you're the Anakel. Maybe. Imagine if you're the king of Egypt. Then you'll save not one Jew. You'll save a whole people. Moshe, play it smart. Hapseichel, Moshe. I know there's a Jew being beaten to death, but you have to see the big picture, long-term strategy. Come on. Don't react with your amygdala. Prefrontal, patience, cool, collective, apathy. Go home, make believe you don't care. You want to cry in your house, I don't care, you can go to therapy. That's what you would expect. It makes sense. Think about an SS officer who would be a successor to Hitler. I'm sorry for my example, I just want to bring it home. And he's seeing a Jew in Auschwitz or Treblinka about to die. The SS is beating him to death. He could kill the SS man and the Jew will stay alive for how much longer? I don't know. But one thing happened. Once you kill this SS man, you're not succeeding Hitler. Your true colors come out. And indeed, it's what happens. Moshe has to run away. He just lost his entire position. So what would cold logic tell Moshe? Stretch out your arm and kill the Egyptian or not? Of course not. What does Moshe do? Vayaches HaMitzri. He does what his stepmother did. Why? Because right now he sees a Jew being beaten to death and he says, I cannot allow this to happen. How things are going to work out? I'm not the creator of this world. I don't have to figure it out. I know my responsibility right now. There's a Jew dying. I will not let this happen. And you know what happens? His arm is joined by an invisible arm. He runs away to Midian. He is a fugitive. But what happens at the end? He comes back and he saves the entire nation. He makes the revolution. Stretching out his arm somehow did work. And it all happens in Midian. Because Moshe Rabbeinu knows my job is not to figure it out. My job is to stretch out my arm. My job is to be proactive, to be present, to care, to be authentic, to be real, to stand up to this evil and darkness and injustice. Bizroya netuya. So the stretched out arm of Batya has a domino effect. It creates the stretched out arm of Moshe Rabbeinu. And when he comes to Midian, he sees 7 girls being harassed by shepherds. He could say, I'm a fugitive, I was almost killed. Mix out. They could all gang up on you tomorrow, call the mafia and kill you. He stretches out his hand again and saves these 7 girls, and that's how he gets his wife. Tzipora. And ultimately, Yisro is his father-in-law, and Hashem reveals himself by the sneh. Let's take a look in the next source. 4th source of the page. Reb Simcha bin Mipshischa, Koil Mavasa Chelek Aleph Shmos. Yesh lilmoid mikan toyeles gdoyle b'avodas Hashem sheloi limnoya adam es atzmi b'shum ma'isa yoshev ha'toiv. There's a tremendous lesson here. People stop themselves from doing the right thing, from doing the good thing. Sheloi yale b'yodei lagia adei tachlisoi. It's purposeless. You're wasting your time. When you show up with your full heart and soul, there's an invisible arm, then nothing will stand in your way. Not because you're Mrs. Brilliant or Mr. Brilliant and capable, but because you join your arm to an invisible arm. She stretched out her hand, just 1 amma, literally 1 cubit, that's what a hand is. 1 amma, she stretched it out. The length of her hand, she stretched out to the length of her hand. This is what Reb Simcha bin Mipshischa, one of the greatest Hasidic masters, the student of the Chayz of Lublin and the Yida Kaddish, the Rebbe of the Kotzker Rebbe and the Chidush Arim and many others. He passed away Yud Beis Elul Tovkuf Pei Zayin 1827. This is what he teaches. So now we understand that this whole Medrash, all of our questions, God doesn't do miracles in vain, why ruin the story, why add something to the text, this is scary. What they're doing is they're giving you the full music, the resonance of understanding the story, because they're talking about 2 possibilities in life. When I dream about something big or small, when I face a difficult obstacle or a challenge, sometimes people face corruption. And as you know, this is quite a dear topic for me. In our community, sometimes people see corruption, abuse, evil. And then those who stand up and speak are accused of ruining families and communities. Why? Because they stood up to injustice. Because they stood up to evil. And it's so frightening. I'm not going to stretch out my arm and fight City Hall. Pharaoh will kill me immediately. All the shidduchim in my families will get destroyed. I'll be thrown out of all the institutions. And I get it, I'm not judging anybody, but this silence, just a few Shabbosim ago, there was a Shabbaton of Ray of Hope. Ray of Hope was an organization that was created for young women who were abused in their bodies, in many of them in very, very horrible ways. Now, I happened to be invited, like 7-8 years ago, for the founding moment of that organization. It was in somebody's home, and there were maybe 5 or 6 girls sitting around the table sharing their stories. What I heard that night changed my life. When I heard those 6 stories, this Shabbos they had almost, I think, 160 or 170 women sharing this. And one of the most common, powerful, tragic common denominators is things that happen within a family. Sometimes fathers and brothers. And then when these poor girls finally speak up, the rest of the family excommunicates them and bans them. Where's the respect for Tati? You're ruining a beautiful family. This is called Ratzachta v'gam Yorashta. First you murder this poor girl, and then when she finally wants to speak up, you murder her a second time, and in a way it's worse even. These are examples. Batya could have easily been quiet and have a very beautiful shidduch and go home to a beautiful party with her father, watching on TV how they're murdering more Jewish children. And this is true in so many areas in life. And by the way, I want to tell you something. Somebody was at Shabbaton, called me a few days ago, and for me it was very, very moving. She said she met a woman over there, and she told me that a disproportionate amount of them tried to commit suicide. A huge amount of them. People don't realize what's happening. People don't realize the pain that people go through. I happen to know this sugya quite well, It's literally emotional murder. You could recover, but it's crazy pain. You're crazy pain. So she told me that a woman told her that I was giving a class a little while ago. And you know I can go off tangent in my classes. Those of you who come here know it's one of my flaws, blessings, whatever. Somebody said, I don't digress, I just extrapolate. Anyway, I was giving a shir, I was learning a text. I don't even remember, but I was giving a shir. And suddenly I started to talk about this. And the need to validate people and to understand what they're going through and not to call them liars. Do people think that a 20-year-old girl or a 17-year-old girl, 10-year-old, it's comfortable for her to come and say stories about her father? That's exactly what she needs in her life? Or she's been suffering for years and years and years and years and years in silence, and her father's like the Gadol Hadar. He's a lowlife. He belongs in prison for 80 years. Sick person. Her brother's a sick person. Instead of doing tshuva, taking accountability, saying, I'm sorry, they now put the blame on her. It's ridiculous. It's ludicrous. And they call this religion. And they say, if you talk about it, it's a chilul Hashem. There was no chilul Hashem, and there's no chilul Hashem like the chilul Hashem of telling victims that our whole God is just a fake God. Because for our intimate pleasures, we'll do anything and use anything. How many people were turned off? How many people today in the open are frum, but hidden they're not frum because they were so turned off by religion and by rabbis? Because instead of standing up to injustice, they're busy protecting perpetrators. Okay, I can go on for 3 hours about this, but we'll stop it here. You get my point. So I went off on a tangent. I was talking about the need of validating people and the need of understanding the pain and the fact that a person's soul at its core is indestructible and no trauma can destroy it. And then I said to the class, I just went off on a tangent. I don't know why. I don't know why. And then, but maybe there was somebody who had to hear it. So this girl tells my friend, she says, that day I wanted to commit suicide. And I happened to be listening to Rabbi Y's class. And he said those words. And it saved my life. Literally. She was there to Shabbaton to tell the story. And then I realized, I didn't prepare for this. I couldn't have guessed this. This is what happens when we stretch out our arms. Everyone in their own way. I don't know. I wouldn't not even know in this story. How could I? Nobody knows these stories. Batya was fortunate to see the end of the story. She saw the liberation. And by the way, the Medrash says why is she called Batya? Batya means Batya, the daughter of Hashem. Hashem told her, you took my child and made him yours. I'm taking you and making me mine. That was the story. She looked at him and said, it's my child. My child? You don't think rationally. A doctor tells a mother, there's nothing I can do for your boy. The mother says, okay, let me go play Tetris. There's nothing to do, let's go drink coffee. It's not what a mother does. It was her son. You made Moshe your son. I'm making you my daughter. Batya. And that changes everything. And the same is true also with spiritual goals. You know, people have goals for their marriage. Can I really have an amazing relationship with my spouse? Can I have an amazing relationship with my children? Can I have a relationship with God, with my soul? And then there's a voice in us that says, forget it, just give up, give up. Can I ever become emotionally healthy? Can I liberate myself from crazy abuse? Can I become a joyfully present and happy person? Can I really discover my inner divine soul and live from expansive consciousness? Is it even possible? There's a voice in us that says, your arm is very limited. You've been like this 30, 40, 50 years. You know how much anxiety you have. Give up, give up. But Batya says, no. You stretch out your arm. And you stretch out your arm, things that are unimaginable happen on every level. But I have to be able to stretch out my arm. And there's a voice in me that says, you're crazy, you're meshugana, you're insane. This is not about ignoring the bigger picture. This is the bigger picture. The ultimate bigger picture is, I don't know, when we think we control the world and we know outcomes, it's a joke. What do we know? I don't even know what's going to happen the next second. Do I know where the next breath is coming from? I trust. I don't even own the oxygen in the world. You know, what big picture do we know? We have a little big picture that we create in our mind. The biggest picture is, if you allow your arm to be a channel for Hashem's arm, that's called the big picture. That's the real big picture. So when a person knows, al pi Torah, al pi Shulchan Aruch, lo yisamed al dam reyacha, don't stand idle when your friend's blood is being spilled, and I stretch out an arm, that's called a stretched out arm. That's aligning my arm with Hashem's arm. And when that happens, there's different levels of achievements and accomplishments. I want to share with you a story, and that's what I want to finish with. I learned this in a very, very beautiful and powerful way. I'm going to tell you the story very briefly. Pesach 1997, I was a yeshiva student. It was 2 years before my wedding. And I was walking on Eastern Parkway one day in Brooklyn and Crown Heights. And a Jew by the name of Rabbi Moshe Katlarsky, Olav Shalom, comes over to me and says, would you like to spend Pesach in Kobe, Japan? Kobe, Japan, right? But what would a nice Chabad boy do Pesach in his home? Kobe seems like a beautiful place, a heimische place to do a Seder. So I told Rabbi Moshe, that's great. So I had a friend, his name is Moshe Lieberman, Rabbi Moshe Lieberman. We went together to Japan. We didn't know what to expect. What happened was, there's a community in Kobe, no rabbi at the time. They have a beautiful shul, and they wanted a Seder for the community. They didn't have anybody to lead it. So they called up Rabbi Katlarsky, Olav Shalom, who ran the shluchim, Chabad houses around the world, and I asked him. So he asked me, so we went to Kobe. He gave us money. We filled up suitcases with matzah and wine and some basic food, and we went off to Kobe, Japan. Gewaldig. It was pretty amazing. We had like a Seder with 200 people. It was pretty incredible. Shabbos after Pesach, we went to Tokyo. At the end of davening, somebody came over to me and Shul said, do you mind giving a shir in Pirkei Avos? It was the Shabbos after Pesach. I said, sure. So we went up to a beautiful library. I gave a shir in Pirkei Avos. There were men there, there were women there. And I finished, and I was about to go home to where we were staying, and we had a little doggy bag with some tuna sandwiches to have a delicious Shabbos lunch. A Jew comes over to me, and I see he has a yarmulke, he has a beard, he has payas. He introduces himself as Adam, and he says, would you like to come eat in our house? I didn't want to say no, and I didn't know about the kashrus, but he looked very, very religious. So I said, I eat Chalav Yisrael and Pas Yisrael. He says, yeah, my house is everything. Come to my house. Okay. So I go with my friend to his house. We come into his home. The homes in Japan are very, very small, extremely small. I come into the house. It had 3 bedrooms, each one maybe 10 feet. It was tiny. I meet his wife. Her name is Yakika. And she's Japanese, a Japanese woman. I'm like, where did I come in here? Is this like an intermarriage situation? I need kosher food. She tells me, my Japanese name is Yakika, but now my name is Rachaleah. I'm like, okay, what's going on here? Then I see a little boy. He's Yirmiyahu with lange payas, chassidische payas, gekreiselte payas, and a big black koppel. I'm like, okay, I guess this house is kosher. And then a little sister, and he tells me, I just finished learning Mishnayos Masechtas Bikurim. Yirmiyahu says, you could test me. So I test him on Masechtas Bikurim. And we sit down, everything is homemade. It was delicious challah, I still remember. Almost as good as my wife's sourdough challah. We had an amazing meal. It was tiny, because there was some other guest. There was another Japanese giyuris that was tiny, but it was like Gan Eden. It was such an ambience. I'm saying, where am I? We, Masechtas Bikurim, Payas. I mean, what's going on here? So the Yakika, Rachaleah, tells me the story. She says, my husband Adam came here from America, a secular Jew. He wanted a little money, so he became an English teacher in Japan. Completely secular, assimilated. He intermarried. He married Yakika, a Japanese woman. Unfortunately, as is the situation with many young Jewish men and Jewish women who marry out of the faith. A few years into our marriage, I ask him, you're Jewish? Yeah, what does it mean? He doesn't know. So I want to know. I'm married to a Jew, I want to know. So I start reading about Judaism and I fall in love with it. There was a conservative rabbi who would come visit. I convert with him. So now I went through a conversion. After he leaves, I read more about Judaism, and then I realize that a conservative conversion is not a halachic conversion. So now I need to convert again. So they go to America, to the West Coast, and she goes through a kosher halachic conversion. They come back to Japan, and now she turned them into a Baltruva, a yarmulke with a board with payas. They have 2 kids. They homeschool them. They teach them Lamudei Kodesh. They teach them Lamudei Chayil. She says, the milking I do myself, so it should be Chalav Yisrael. The baking I do myself, so it should be Pas Yisrael. And he just finished Maseches Bikurim that he learned with his father, and you could test him. And I was there a whole Shabbos. It was like a very, very special experience, extremely special experience. And to see her dedication and her commitment and loyalty and her enthusiasm and her kids' enthusiasm and her husband's enthusiasm. Sometimes you don't see that in this zip code, that level of enthusiasm. In any case, I left Japan. I came back to good old Brooklyn, New York. Okay. My father, Olav Hashalom, had a Yiddish newspaper called the Allgemeiner Journal. He used to have old Yiddish writers then they started to die. So he asked me to do a column on the Parsha every week. So those years I was doing a column on the Parsha. And it was, I remember, one Wednesday morning, and the paper goes to press, and he calls me, he says, I didn't get your column. I said, yeah, Tate, I was traveling. I won't be able to write one. He says, but I have this empty space, please, something. I said, but it takes me a few hours. I won't have it ready. He says, anything, could you send anything? So I said, let me look at my computer. Maybe there's something. And I start looking through my computer, maybe some old article I wrote that I could, use. And then I see that a number of years ago, after I came back from Japan, I wrote in Yiddish, I wrote up a diary of that Shabbos. But the problem is it's a Parsha article. This is not a Parsha story. So you know how the Jewish mind works. It was the Shabbos after Shavuos. So I added a paragraph. It's the Shabbos after Shavuos. I'm still thinking about Megillus Rus. Rus tells her mother-in-law, wherever you go, I go, where you sleep, I sleep, where you die, I die, your nation is my people, your God is my God, right? You remember? Asher telchi elech bat asher talini olin amech ami elekayech eleki basher tamusi amos v'shamek kaver. And I said, some people think that this was only in the times of Rus. And I want to share with you about a woman I met some time ago that literally reminded me of Rus. And I told this whole story in the article, which I already wrote up. And I wrote, when I met this woman and I heard from her, Amech Ami Elekayach Elkiyah, she left everything to become a Jew. You could still hear the echo of Rus's commitment in our own times. I sent over the article to my father. It was printed. That Shabbos, my parents made a Sheva Brachas for a relative in the house. One of the men there was a little tipsy. I still remember, he comes over to my father and he says, such nepotism by you. Father says, what are you talking about? He says, your son's article, let's face it, was trash. It's supposed to be on the Parsha. I buy it, I want to read something on the Parsha. He writes to me about Japan and Pas Yisrael and Yirmiyahu, Maseches Bikurim, and a black yarmulke and a conservative or Orthodox conversion. And he connects it to Rus because he reminded himself of Rus. Come on! That's not an article. That's rubbish. If he wouldn't be his son, you would have never printed it. It belonged in the garbage. He was a little tipsy. He was saying this to my father in front of me. And my father smiled. I had nothing to say. I actually felt that he was a little right. Because I had like a few minutes. I just added a paragraph and so, shine. Years and years passed. I really forgot about the story. Things move on. Years later, I was invited to Melbourne, Australia for a lecture. To fly to Melbourne, you stop in Los Angeles. I stopped in Los Angeles, and I had a friend living in Agoura Hills, California at the time. So we went with my wife to stay there for the night. And I asked, what time is Shachris tomorrow morning? They said 6 o'clock Shachris in Rabbi Sapachinsky's shul. So I got up early. I went to the minyan for Shachris, 6 o'clock a.m. And then I had to rush back home. We had to get our flight. We had a stopover, but we had to go back to Melbourne. On the way out, the rabbi says, Rabbi Jacobson, I owe you a debt of gratitude for years. I wanted to call you, but I forgot. You're here. I remember. I have to tell you a story. I'm like, okay, go ahead. And this is what he tells me. He said, I want you to know that I get emotional thinking about what happened. He said, I want you to know something. A number of years ago, a couple moved here from Japan. They wanted to be in a community. I always have guests at my table for Shabbos. Rabbi Sapachinsky is one of the Chabad Shluchim in Agoura Hills, California. So there's always guests at my table. And they came over Shabbos afternoon, and it happened to be that there were no other guests. It was just them. And they started to talk about how hard it is to integrate. And the worst thing is how people bully their kids because of what they look like. They look Japanese, and kids could sometimes be not nice. So I don't know if it was the school, one of the schools there, I'm not sure exactly, but they were bullying the kids. And how much pain. And she said, I went through so much to become a Jew. So much sacrifice. I converted twice. I changed my husband. And this is the treatment. And then she spoke about, the difficulty of integrating and something that happened in shul, and how people could be so snobby and selfish and careless and detached. And instead of really appreciating people for who they are, it's often with judgment, and you don't fit into my clique, and you don't look like me, and she was so turned off. And she was like, she said, Hazois Nami, like, this is the Judaism I sacrificed so much for. Instead of people being appreciative, being curious, it's the exact opposite. And she really downloaded her heart. And Rabbi Sapachinsky tells me, Rabbi Jacobson, I'm sitting there, and I know she's right. Some people could be rude, obnoxious, or just insecure. People live in their own bubble, and they just don't know how to be gracious and kind. Right? In parentheses, you see somebody in shul in a supermarket, a stranger, smile, you embrace them, you say, but not everybody does that. They're afraid, I don't know, whatever the issue is. I'm not here to analyze them at the moment. He said, I didn't know what to say, I was just listening. We finished the fish, and he says, I want to tell you something. I always have a minute between the fish and the next course. I say over something. I say over a Dvar Torah. How do I get a Dvar Torah? I get your father's newspaper. Okay. And usually I read it, and I always read your article on the Parsha. So it's very nice stuff that you write, and I write. He said, that week, it didn't come on Friday. And I wanted to say something inspiring, and you always have something inspiring to say. So I went out to the front to see, maybe the newspaper came and I didn't notice it. And I saw it came, and I brought it back to the dining room table, and I told him, I said, listen, this writer usually has good things to say, but I didn't read it this week, so I don't know. But usually I trust him. So I'm going to read you his Dvar Torah. It's in Yiddish, but I'm going to translate as I read it, and I'm going to read it for you. And usually it's something nice, and I think it'll be good. And he starts reading it. It was the Shabbos after Shavuos. We're just coming from Shavuos. We just read Rus. And I'm thinking about Rus, and I want to share about a Rus in our own days. And I want to share about a Shabbos I had in Tokyo, Japan. And I wrote this whole article, detail by detail, about the couple sitting right there at his table. And I'm like, sometimes our Judaism can get boring and clumsy and burdensome and monotonous. And then once in a while you meet people whose souls are on fire. Their relationship with God is so real, it's so authentic. And just like Rus in her day, Odysseus Kika, I can hear her say, your people is my people, your God is my God, where you go, I go, where you dwell, I dwell. Amech ami velekayech elaki, and how inspiring it is. He tells me she's sobbing, her husband is sobbing, Rabbi Sapachinsky is sobbing. And he says, I want you to know, the tchias hamesim, the resurrection, the emotional comfort and confidence you gave these people that Shabbos, you'll never even understand. They were so downtrodden, they felt so unappreciated, they felt so unwelcome. The sacrifice was for nothing. And then, this was nothing I could have staged. I couldn't have orchestrated this that week in a newspaper, like a big newspaper. Nobody asked for it, nobody initiated it. It's years after it happened. It's just this article all about them and how much we have to appreciate them. And he said, if you did nothing in your life but this, your reward will be infinite for the way you gave them back their souls. It gave them a whole new lease on life and on Jewish life for them and their kids. He's sharing this with me like 6:30, 7 o'clock in the morning. And suddenly I have a flashback to the Sheva Brachas at my parents' home. This guy screaming at my father, nepotism. This article should have never been published. I forgot about it. It was years before. And suddenly I have this flashback. And then I'm thinking how I actually agreed with him because I just took that out from the computer because I needed a fast article. And then I learned the ultimate lesson in life. And this is the lesson of Batya Bat Para. And that is, stretch out your arm. And when you stretch out your arm, it's joined by Hashem's invisible arm. And Hashem's invisible arm literally is boundless and infinite, and its impact is beyond imagination. Have a wonderful week. You're welcome. Dank für ein Kommen. Thank you. Should be a good Tibeter for you and the whole mishpacha. Yes. That's a good question. Was it a Hebrew name or Egyptian name? So some say, the Even Ezra says that it's actually an Egyptian name, Moshe. Others say she named him Moshe in Egyptian. There's an argument among the commentators.
I read something
Yes.
Okay.
Ibn Ezra discusses it, yeah.
You probably said this right, but I didn't read.
Thank you for coming.
Who was Basia to marry? Such a... And
Thank you for coming.
And when we go into a davening to have this kavanah to Hashem,
Yeah.
how can I...
Yes.
What's a pasuk that I can say when I'm davening to bring me to...
That's a good question. So they say that somebody once asked the Rebbe Rayatz, the previous Rebbe, how he accomplished so much in the Soviet Union under impossible circumstances. So, you know, at the end of Shemona Esrei, people say a pasuk with the name. The first letter is from the beginning of their name, and the last letter is from the end of their name. You ever heard of that minhag?
I know the intertwining of Hashem, my
So-
name with Hashem's name. I don't
No,
know.
so his name was Yosef. So the pasuk for that is in Tehillim 139. Hashem Yigmer Ba'adi, Hashem Chazdecha La'olam Ma'aseh Yadecha Al Taref. It's Tehillim 139. So it starts off Hashem Yigmer Ba'adi. Hashem will complete for me. So that's the pasuk that he would say every day in Shemona Esrei. So he said, I do my thing and God completes. Hashem Yigmer Ba'adi. Hashem Yigmer Ba'adi. I stretch out my arm, and wherever it has to go, it goes. Yeah. I have learned this always in life. Dank für ein Kommen. Moshe, why he stayed so loyal to whom?
Judaism, to Jews. Why does he see from Israel? Why does he why? He wasn't exposed to them. He didn't know from their world.
Because by him it wasn't culture. It's a good question, because it wasn't culture, it was real. He was a man of God. He got the truth. Once you get the truth, it doesn't matter where you are. You could be in the depth of darkness. You're a glow of God. It's irrelevant where you are.
Like going from Yosef to Moshe, like why do any of them stay?
You also stay loyal. Why do you stay loyal? You're here every week. Why do you stay loyal? Because the soul is loyal, that's why. Thank you for coming. Thank you.